Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 26, Alma chapters 23 through 29. They never did fall away. This week's guest is Wayne May. He was born and raised in Wisconsin, and he's been a convert to the LDS Church for more than 36 years. He's served in 4 Branch Presidencies, 3 Elder Quorum Presidencies, Seminary Instructor, Gospel Doctrine Instructor, Veil Worker at the St. Paul, Minnesota Temple, and currently is serving as Gospel Doctrine Teacher of the Menomonie Wisconsin Branch, Oakdale, Minnesota State. His wife, Kristine, is active with Wayne in the archaeological discoveries of the Midwest. Together they publish the quarterly magazine of Ancient American, which has been in continuous print for 16 years and covers the pre-Columbian Americas. Wayne and Kristine are the parents of 7 children and grandparents to 16. Wayne is an author of 4 books on the subject of Book of Mormon archaeology in North America. He gives firesides to members and non-members alike. Wayne has been presenting information on the topic of North America's archaeological data since 1994, which demonstrates how it applies to the Book of Mormon timeline.
Hi everybody, I'm Rod Meldrum, and I'm excited to have you join us for another one of our podcasts. We are very excited about having a special guest with us. This is Wayne May, and a lot of people know him already, but he is one of the foremost experts in the church on the subject of the ancient civilizations of North America, the Mound Builder civilization and the Adena civilization. And we are excited about having him join us. So this lesson for this week is on Alma chapter 23 through 29. And this is composing several chapters that talk about the Anti-Nephi-Lehis. While we have Wayne, we're going to spend more time on some of the aspects of metallurgy, which is just briefly mentioned here in these chapters. But as you know, basically we want everybody to know that this is from the Come Follow Me manual. Our goal here is to take some aspect of the lesson and then go into depth and detail, because we're not going to cover all of the different aspects of the lesson manual. We're assuming you've already done that. We're also using the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon here for our reference material. And so if we go to chapter 23 here, I wanted to point out a couple of quick things, and then we'll bring Wayne in here when we get to chapter 24 here, talking about metallurgy. And then we'll have some opportunity to talk about swords and head plates and breastplates and all kinds of different things that involve metallurgy. So does that sound good, Wayne?
Yes, absolutely fine.
All right, fantastic.
All good.
Okay, so chapter 23, we're going to start off here in verse 6. And about halfway through, it basically talks about as many as the Lamanites had believed in their preaching were converted unto the Lord, never did fall away. The preaching here of these missionaries was so powerful that when the Lamanites were converted to the gospel, they never did fall away. And I want to share with you a little bit about that. This is on page 247 in the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon. And this is a little quote here from Elder Ezra Taft Benson. But he says, "The Book of Mormon is to be a standard unto my people, which are the house of Israel, saith the Lord." And that is from 2 Nephi chapter 29, verse 2. It is a standard we should heed and follow. In the 20th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord devotes several verses to summarizing the vital truths which the Book of Mormon teaches. So this is Doctrine and Covenants, section 20, verses 17 to 23, and also 29 to 31. It speaks of God, the creation of man, the fall, the atonement, the ascension of Christ into heaven, prophets, faith, repentance, baptism, and the Holy Ghost, endurance, prayer, justification, and sanctification through grace and loving and serving God. Quote, "We must know these essential truths. Aaron and Ammon and their brethren in the Book of Mormon taught these same kinds of truths to the Lamanite people." This is from Alma chapter 18, verses 22 to 39. "Which were in the darkest abyss. After accepting these eternal truths," the Book of Mormon states, "those converted Lamanites never did fall away. If our children and grandchildren are taught and heed these same truths, will they fall away? We best instruct them in the Book of Mormon at our dinner table, by our firesides, at their bedsides, and in our letters and phone calls, in all of our goings and comings." That's from Ezra Taft Benson, A Witness and a Warning. That's from 2009 Deseret book copy. So basically, when we become truly converted to the gospel, if we adhere to the Book of Mormon, we will never fall away. Then it talks about in verse 13, the Anti-Nephi-Lehis. Now, I wanted to just make one quick mention here, and that is that when it comes down to the Anti-Nephi-Lehis, I thought, why would they call themselves Anti-Nephi-Lehis? Well, that word anti is an interesting thing because it actually comes from the Egyptian. The Egyptian is anti, A-N-T-E, basically, and it means the one of, or a person of. And so when it says Anti-Nephi-Lehis, what they're saying is a person of Nephi and Lehi. And it came, and basically in verse 16 it says where the name came from. By the way, the information I just mentioned about the Egyptian is actually on the bottom of page 248 in the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon. And now it came to pass that the king, this is verse 16 of chapter 23, now it came to pass that the king and those who were converted were desirous that they might have a name, that thereby they might be distinguished from their brethren. Therefore the king consulted with Aaron and many of their priests concerning the name that they should take upon them, that they might be distinguished. And it came to pass that they called their names Anti-Nephi-Lehis, and they were called by this name, and were no more called Lamanites. And they began to be very industrious people, yea, and they were friendly with the Nephites. Therefore they did open a correspondence with them, and the curse of God did no more follow them. They are essentially saying, we are no more Lamanites, we are of the people of Nephi and Lehi. So that's a little clarification on the Anti-Nephi-Lehis. So we know one of the most famous aspects of them is that they made a covenant that they would never again fight against their brethren, the Lamanites. This is chapter 24, and verse 14. There's a portion here in the annotated Book of Mormon that has the gold bar, basically, that is highlighted. He doth visit us by his angels, that the plan of salvation might be made known unto us, as well as unto future generations. So they talk about this plan of salvation. Now, we've already talked about this with Amberly Nelson in a previous podcast, but on page 250 of the annotated Book of Mormon, it talks about the plan of salvation, which is actually very unique to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. There's no other religion out there, folks, that have the same understanding of the plan of salvation as we do, which was all from Revelation from Joseph Smith and from the Scriptures. But interestingly enough, there is an amazing earthwork in Newark, Ohio, that has the entire plan of salvation encoded into its gigantic structure, which is over 4 square miles in extent. If you want to know more about that, you go to Amberly Nelson, her second podcast that we did with her fairly recently, and we have an amazing discussion about a 2,000-plus-year-old earthwork in Newark, Ohio, that has embedded in it the octagons and the squares and the circles and so forth, a representation of the entire plan of salvation as only the restored gospel of Jesus Christ can give it. There is no other religion on this earth that could interpret this 4-square-mile temple complex, which, by the way, is the largest in the world, and even today. So I just wanted to point that out. That's in verse 14. And now we want to get to the stuff that we're going to talk with Wayne about here. So verse 16 of Alma chapter 24 says, And now, my brethren, if our brethren seek to destroy us, behold, we will hide away our swords. Yea, even we will bury them deep in the earth, that they might be kept bright as a testimony that we have never used them at the last day. And if our brethren destroy us, behold, we shall go to our God and shall be saved. So, Wayne, I wanted to start off our conversation here a little bit with the first thing that they're mentioning here in this verse is something called a sword. So, what evidence is there? Well, first off, what exactly would we say is a sword? Because there seems to be some misunderstanding about what a sword is. There's some people who believe that a club with obsidian blades in it constitutes a sword. But swords historically have not been a wooden thing. It's been made out of metal.
Swords, definitely metal. They go way back. I mean, when you a lot of people don't realize that even sword the Romans, a lot of their early swords weren't any more than over just barely 12 inches long, and it's just simply known as the Roman short sword. And people think that all the time they got to find something that's huge, and there are big swords. Don't get me wrong, but there's also a lot of small ones. And in the record here in North America, when you really peruse the old mound builder books. Now, you got to remember, archaeology was not set up yet at this time. So what we have, thank goodness, we had enough educated men from different fields who actually dug the mounds, and some of it was recorded in their diaries, field notes, journals, whatever. And they saw plenty of evidence for swords. But what you will find in the record is that they will talk about the hilt, and then they'll talk about this stretch of rust laying right down from the hip to the knee. And that's the iron blade. It's long gone back to the earth. So there is no sword to physically pick up. Now, some have made it through, but very, very few. But you'll find the hilt a couple times, even a sheath has survived in the mounds. And all this material is in the mound builder books from about 1870 to about 1920. That's where you'll find talk of this material.
Wow, yeah. And in fact, if you have your annotated Book of Mormon here, I want to show you a picture. This is actually on page 251, and I'll just kind of pick it up here so you can kind of just see it there a little bit. But on page 251 in the annotated Book of Mormon, it actually talks about a sword, and there's a picture of a guy here that was taken actually by Wayne, and this picture shows a large ancient iron sword was found buried deep in the soil on the shores of Lake Superior. Although not dated, it has ancient hallmarks. But this is basically a very large sword. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Wayne?
Yeah, I sure can. This man's name is Harold, by the way, but I won't tell you his last name. I'm trying to buy the sword, by the way. So that's private information. However, he was walking on Lake Superior. This is about 4 or 5 years ago, walking his dog out on a beautiful morning on the sandy beach. He just saw it. I don't know if it was the tip of the blade or what's called the tang, where the handle goes off, but a point of it was sticking out of the sand, and he literally just grabbed this thing and just pulled it right up out of the beach, and there it was, voila, and this big sword. Now, the friend of mine who put me onto this is Dr. Don Spahn, who lives downstate Michigan, and Don, he is a good old boy. I mean, he's a straight guy. He's into isolation. It's hard to say the word diffusion, but at least you can talk to this guy without getting upset. And that's why I like Don. But when Don writes about this particular sword, he calls it a big knife. He can't bring himself to say the word sword. That's almost like blasphemy, because we all know the Native Americans didn't have swords, right? Now, let me tell you the rest of the story. This same guy, Harold, he went to the university in Toronto, Canada. He was ready to give them this wonderful find to add to their collection in the museum. And when he got there, the curator thanked him profusely for thinking of them, but he said, "We cannot accept this item." Well, Harold was blown away. He said, "What do you mean? You don't have anything this size?" And they said, "Well, that's the problem. We all know that Native Americans did not have swords. Therefore, this falls into the category of fringe archaeology, and we cannot have this in our museum. But thank you very much and have a nice day." Now, that's the gospel. This is what happens over and over again in North America. And I could show you myriads of cases. Matter of fact, I'm actually thinking about writing a book about fringe archaeology. It's really that dense out there.
Well, I tell you what, there's another page in the annotated Book of Mormon that I want to bring out as well. This is on page 162, and if you take a look at the page here, there are a number of different artifacts that have been discovered here in North America. And this goes all the way back to Mosiah chapter 9, verse 16, which it says, I did arm them with bows and with arrows, and with swords and with scimitars, and with clubs and with slings, and with all manner of weapons. That's Mosiah chapter 9, verse 16. And swords and scimitars are interesting. Wayne, what's the difference between a sword and a scimitar?
Well, the obvious, just from looking at a scimitar, has a curve, and that's what we see here on the bottom of this page and the one at the top. They both have the curved blades, and that's also very common in the Middle East. Matter of fact, in the Middle East, their earlier swords, they made more scimitars than straight-bladed swords. The straight-bladed sword was there, but it was heavier use as metals developed coming out of Western Europe. But the scimitar was very popular where Israel was and their neighbors around them, the curved sword. And I can show you, I can take you to 10 private collections and show you private swords, straight and scimitar, mostly made out of copper, a couple made out of iron that are in really poor shape. I mean, the iron, guys, in the acidic soil of the Midwest, it just doesn't make it.
Let's talk about that for just a little bit, because there's been people who have said, well, wait, if the Book of Mormon is true and they made all these iron swords, where's all the iron swords at? But people need to understand that when it comes down to iron, cars don't even last that long, maybe 50, 60, 70 years, and cars are starting to rust out. Cars that were made back in the early 1900s and so forth are mostly completely rusted away. Even bridges and so forth, and almost anything made out of metal is going to rust out pretty quickly in that humid climate of the Midwest. So anybody who would expect to find steel, for example, expecting that's something that's not probably going to happen. Iron takes a little bit longer typically, but iron basically turns into rust, which is eventually what will just be a red stain in the ground, won't it?
Yes, that's it. It's just a red layer of dust. If they get down to it without, losing it in the dirt, because it's so fine, if they get down to it and they can see it, they just see a layer of red sand laying right there, right beside the deceased body, by the hip of the person. So it's gone. Now, there are, in Pennsylvania, we have one really good iron sword.
Can you tell us about pages 162? Any of the swords on there, the scimitars?
I'll tell you, the iron sword, there's a real nice one in Pennsylvania. There's a real nice one out of Utah, and there's two in Texas. And we also have a bronze sword that came out of North Dakota, which I have shown before at your events, bronze. We also have some bronze points that came out of Illinois and Oklahoma, and they're also in private collections. An LDS man was moving earth on his farm in Texas. Now, you can find this at BYU. It's there. When he removed this pile of earth, he uncovered a sword. And because he was LDS, he contacted somebody at BYU in that type of thing that could help him with metallurgy. And they said, well, send it to us. And he did. They sent him the sword. They looked at it, and they said this sword was, it wasn't steel. It was bronze. And they said this sword would be an actual fit for something out of the Mediterranean about 100 BC, maybe to 100 AD. But the problem is it was in Texas, therefore it must be fake. Now, that's at BYU in one of their study programs, because the paper came out of BYU. I contacted that same professor, and I wish I could remember his name I just don't have it in front of me. But I contacted that professor. I said, would you give me the name of that gentleman, member of the church in Texas, so I can contact him just to show the sword? The professor at the Y would not give me that gentleman's contact. I contacted the professor at BYU because I wanted to get a hold of the guy that owned the sword in Ancient American Magazine, and they refused to give me the name of this man to contact him in Texas. So right now, that story stands as a fraudulent sword, even though it's made out of bronze, and it looks like something from the Middle East, but it came out of Texas. If they would have found that in Central America, it would have been on the front cover of the Ensign.
Probably so, yeah. Hey, I want to go back for just a second and talk about some of the differences between the metals, because many of our viewers here, our listeners, may not be aware of the difference between, for example, bronze, brass, iron, steel, and what kind of ores are necessary to have those. So I was just going to very quickly mention the difference between bronze and brass. Basically, both of them begin with copper, but then bronze has tin in it. So it's an alloy between copper and tin, and that makes bronze, which is kind of what was used primarily in the Old World. But here in America, or actually I should say in the Book of Mormon, it specifically talks about brass, which is a alloy between copper and it's called zinc. And in the Book of Mormon, it talks about they had gold and copper and silver and ziff, and we're thinking maybe that ziff is actually potentially could be zinc, which you would need to have in order to alloy those two together to make brass. And then iron and steel, the main difference between that is the carbon content of the metal. So as you add more carbon to it, it becomes more carbon steel, and that's one of the differences between iron and steel. Do you want to add anything to that, Wayne?
Well, I was going to say a lot of people aren't aware of this, but there are zinc mines in northwestern Illinois, and in many of the Hopewell Mounds. It's just that the finished products weren't there with it, so they don't know what do they use the zinc for, and so we don't know for sure. But again, it could have been used for obviously metallurgy. That's the big hope.
On page 39 of the annotated Book of Mormon, it talks about this is clear back in 1 Nephi chapter 19 verse 1. It says, "I did make plates of ore," and there are places there in 1 Nephi with this is now in the land of Nephi there, and they talked about so in the annotated Book of Mormon we have information about like the Cooper's Furnace and other places around Etowah, Georgia, and up into Tennessee that actually had the different ores that are mentioned. And that's another thing that I think I'd like to have Wayne maybe address here a little bit, and that is all of the metals that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon, specifically while they were in the land of Nephi, are around an area that is in Tennessee. And around what city is that close to, Wayne?
Morristown.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you mean Book of Mormon? I'm sorry. Talking about Book of Mormon or Morristown, Tennessee?
Well, yeah, both. In the land of Nephi.
Well,
area.
we believe that.
Yeah.
Yes, the land of Nephi, of course.
Yeah.
Let me just expand on that a little bit. Early on, when I first started doing this, 93, 94, 95, I knew about all the copper coming out of Upper Michigan, but I didn't know about all the ore in Tennessee. In Morristown, Tennessee, I went there to visit a Cherokee gal who had contacted me through Ancient American, and she had this cave that she wanted me to look at. And in seeing the cave, her name is Leslie Kalin, by the way, and she's on the rolls there for the Cherokee, and she's very active with her people. And it was a lovely cave, great petroglyphs, really neat stuff. But when we came out of the cave, now keep in mind, all these years, all I've got for copper with the Nephites is Upper Michigan. And yet I've got Nephi living in Tennessee, and I'm thinking to myself, if he's running up to Michigan to get copper, he's going to run into the Mulekites probably a whole lot earlier than what the Book of Mormon says at 400 years. So I was concerned, where is the copper down south? Well, when I came out of this cave, we're standing there visiting, and I look over here and I see all these pits, and they look like pits from Upper Michigan. And I just asked her, I said, what are the pits? Is it you guys just digging holes in your property? She said, oh no, those are ancient copper mines. And I thought, hallelujah. I got my copper for Nephi, because Nephi used copper right away to dress up the wooden structure of the temple built after the pattern of Solomon when he separated from Laman and Lemuel. So I thought, man, what are we? And the big relief was nobody asked me that from 1994 to 2005. Where's the copper in Tennessee? And so I escaped that one. I would have said, I don't know. and now I got it. It's in Tennessee. It's all over. It's in Georgia too.
In fact, going back to page 65 in the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, here we have on the bottom right-hand corner is a photo of one of the placards in the McClung Museum in Knoxville, or Knoxville, Tennessee, University of Tennessee there. And it actually shows some little copper beads, and it says Southeast Tennessee may have been the nearby source of the copper used to make these beads. And in fact, on this page, we also talk about mining in Ducktown, Tennessee. And this is from 2 Nephi now, chapter 5. We actually have several scriptures here. As far as Book of Mormon metals, what evidence exists for the sourcing, smelting, and manufacturing of metals into tools, plates, and objects mentioned in the Book of Mormon? And in Jerem chapter 1, verse 8, it gives us the first idea of what kind of metals they found here on the Promised Land. It says, and we multiplied exceedingly and spread upon the face of the land, and became exceedingly rich in gold and silver and precious things and fine workmanship of wood, in buildings and machinery, and in iron and copper and brass and steel, making all manner of tools of every kind to till the ground, and the weapons of war, yea, the sharp-pointed arrow, the quiver, the dart, javelin, and preparations for war. Now, in 2 Nephi, it tells us again some of these metals. It talks about iron and copper and brass and steel, gold and silver, and precious ores, which it says in 2 Nephi here was in great abundance. So this is still in the land of Nephi area. And then Mosiah also is talking about this in Mosiah chapter 11, verse 8. It says, it came to pass that King Noah built many elegant and spacious buildings, and he ordered them with fine work of wood, and all manner of precious things of gold and silver and iron and brass and of ziph and of copper. So those are the primary metals that are talked about. And interestingly enough, every one of these metals that were found primarily in the land of Nephi area exist all around what is the largest city in the general area there is Chattanooga, Tennessee. Ducktown and these areas are within radius of those areas. But it's really interesting to see that the very first gold rush in this dispensation was actually not in California. It was actually in Tennessee and Georgia, that area. So there's copper ore that is there from different mines there at Ducktown and other places around that area. Really about a radius of about 30, 40 miles radius from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Every metal that is mentioned in the Book of Mormon to be there in the land of Nephi is in fact there. And I wanted to also share a couple of other things here about that. This is now just for information's sake, I am pulling a few slides basically, or images here from the DVD set called Book of Mormon Evidence Number 2, which is talking about Book of Mormon Metallurgy, which is the third disc in the set. And so this is all in that set of the DVDs there. But this is called Mining at Ducktown. And it said, copper was used by Native Americans in the Copper Basin area, and European settlers rediscovered copper at Copper Basin in the tri-state area of Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina in 1843. Started mining it. Mines produced, get this is what's really interesting. Mines produced copper, iron, sulfur, zinc, and small amounts of gold and silver. Before 1900, Copper Basin was the largest metal mining district in the southeast, and the last mine closed in 1987. Now, this is from Western North Carolina Heritage. This is talking about mines and minerals there, and they talk about that the second paragraph down says, there is not a single county west of the Blue Ridge, that's the Blue Ridge Mountains of Tennessee, that does not contain rich abundance of iron ores. So this is talking about iron. And then also these other if you want to read those for yourself, basically, it talks about all these other different kinds of things. But one thing I did want to point out, though, the third paragraph down says, this is the center of the mica mining and of considerable excitement about minerals. So the ancient Hopewell mound builder people, they like to use that mica for what, Wayne?
Basically, it was, two things. Basically, designs, beautiful things, but they also use, I'm sure, for passing messages, for reflecting both. And they also covered their dead in it sometimes. So it had a multiple use.
Many of the barrels were completely covered. The ground was covered with sheets of this mica, clear up into Ohio and Illinois. So this mica
Yeah.
was being mined down there. It says
mica-
all around the hills are spotted with diggings. Most of the mines which yield well show signs of having been worked before a very long time ago, no doubt by the occupants before the Cherokee Indians. That was a book called On Horseback back in 1889. So we have other information that actually shows that when the first settlers came into this territory around Tennessee, they were finding actual mine shafts going back into some of these ore deposits, and they asked the Native Americans, they said, who was doing this mining? And they said, we don't know. It was somebody before us, but we weren't doing this mining. So that kind of tells you a little bit about the earlier people, which were obviously the Nephites here, and if our geography is correct. And then this is from the heart of the Alleghenies here. Just talks about these mounds and so forth. So I'm not going to read all that. If you want to, you can refer back to the DVD. But this has some just amazing information about that. So bottom line is we also know that the Book of Mormon had furnaces, right? And it says that in 3rd Nephi it says they were cast into a furnace and received no harm. 4th Nephi said that they cast them into furnaces of fire. Mormon chapter 8 verse 24 says, yea, even the fiery furnace could not harm them. So the Book of Mormon also talks about having furnaces. What would be the purpose of furnaces if they weren't smelting stuff?
Well, I just say that it's obviously smelting. There's smelters, I mean, from Wisconsin to Ohio. They're around. It's not a secret. Of course, when they are spotted by our professionals, they right away think it must be historic. Again, not allowing the Native Americans or anybody before them to have the savvy to understand how to work with metals.
Exactly. So what evidence is there for ancient smelting? Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about just briefly. I have this book right here, and Wayne actually introduced me to this gentleman. His name is William Connor, Bill Connor, and he wrote this book. He's not a member of our faith, but he wrote this book called Iron Age America Before Columbus. And on the front cover, it shows a picture of him when he was 21 or 22 years old, and he just became the first science reporter for the Chillicothe Gazette, which in Chillicothe, Ohio. Wayne, would you like to tell us a little bit more about Bill Connor and what he discovered out there in Ohio?
Well, he had a chance to work with Mallory there, and Mallory was the expert on furnaces. And I know they found at least around 20, possibly 30, and they identified them. A couple of them completely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Mallory compared the furnace construction to a Roman furnace about 100 AD. He said it's the same type of construction. He said, historically, no one would come into America today and build this type of furnace. It's something from the ancients, and yet they're all fluffed off as being stuff that the French and the British ran around and did during the French and Indian War, and it's just absolutely silly. So Mallory was the guy. I mean, he knew this inside and out. But the good thing is that Connor, he was able to sit at his feet and learn from this guy. And then Connor carried Mallory's work deep up into our time. And right now, Bill, he's got to be in his high 80s. He might even be at 90 by now. He's really up there. But one of his best contributions that came later was at the Garrett site when him and his grandson found the clay mold with the iron axe head still inside. That is absolutely, I mean, it's undeniable.
Wait a minute, you're telling me that they found
go away. It's awesome.
They were working on a furnace site. They dug up what looked like a rock, and then they broke it open, and what was inside of it again?
Well, no, they didn't break it open. It was partially exposed. It's the clay mold, and the iron axe head is still in the mold. And on the backside, which got saved, which was nice, you could see where the molten iron was poured into the mold. It's the pour hole, which means they had to have a portable crucible to hold that hot metal. I mean, this is really big deal. It's awesome. And
Big deal.
luckily, I got it. I've got that artifact from Bill, so it's preserved. So we will have that to pass along.
Yeah,
It's in a safe place.
that is such a powerful
Now,
one.
I want to share
By the
something
way,
else with you, Rod.
is that? Go ahead, yes.
Yeah, I want to share something that's brand new. This is brand new. Okay. Can I hear a brand new? Brand new. We've got Dr. Brand new. Dr. Robert List and Don McEwen, they stumbled onto, well, first of all, List was looking at these huge slag piles on the Pearl River, just off the Mississippi. I mean, they're massive. I've written about them in Ancient American. He knows that one was for lead, but one was for iron. And so out of curiosity, just to be sure, he took the one that was iron. He shipped off samples to a laboratory at one of the steel mills in Pennsylvania. They came back with a report, and I got to tell you, this is going to blow your socks off. They said, yes, you have a iron slag pile, but it's not from iron slag. It is from steel. Steel slag pile on the Pearl River. This is brand new. We just got this summer. I mean, just right now, it's hot. And as soon as they get it put together, we're going to put that out in Ancient American and make it available to everybody. And then when I come out in Utah, whenever we get to come out, I'll come out and I'll share this with you from Dr. List. This is incredible. Steel slag. We got it.
Well, see, that's one of the things, folks, that you need to understand is that whenever you have smelting going on, there's one thing that is left behind that's unmistakable because it doesn't happen in nature. Basically, you have rocks that have glazing and so forth on it, but you also have this slag. And in fact, I wanted to share with you for just a second here. Let me get to the right part here. This is talking about right here, actually. Book of Mormon furnaces. This is from the Complete History of Illinois. This is back in 1874. It says the circular fortification was surrounded by two walls with an intervening ditch 20 feet in depth. On Paint Creek, this is in Ohio, this is 13 miles west of Chillicothe, besides other extensive works, was discovered the remains of a walled town. It was built on the summit of a hill about 300 feet in altitude and encompassed by a wall 10 feet in height, made of stone in their natural state. The area thus enclosed contained 130 acres. On the south side of it, there was found the remains of what appeared originally to have been a row of furnaces or smith shops, about which cinders were found several feet in depth. So numerous were the works of this kind in Ohio, it would require a large volume to speak of them in detail. Then it goes on to say here, this is from Micah Schweitzer, the prehistoric treasure in the fields of Indiana. This was actually on the NPR radio. And I just wanted to share with you just a little bit about this because this is so interesting. It's talking about some of the same areas where Wayne was just mentioning. But this says the fields are called the Mann Hopewell site after the farmer who owned their sprawling 500 acres. Two of the site's earthen structures are among the biggest mounds built anywhere by the Hopewell. Amateur archaeologist Charlie Lacer began walking the Mann fields in the 1950s, collecting what he found along the way. Now, the deal was he could only pick up what he found on the surface. There was no digging involved. He could not dig to get artifacts. He just had to pick up what he could find on the surface. He said, quote, "You could find stuff that you could not find on any other site around here," Lacer says. I mean, there were just tons of materials there. You couldn't pick up everything you saw. You had to be kind of selective, particularly if you were carrying this stuff in your pockets, because he would wear jeans, and then after a while he stopped wearing jeans and started using bib overalls because his pockets would become so heavy with all the artifacts in them that his pants were falling off. So he put the suspenders on there, right? So Lacer managed to stuff a lot into his pockets, 40,000 artifacts that he donated to the Indiana State Museum 2 years ago. But the interesting thing about this is this is still part of this same article here. He says, but there may be even more remarkable discovery, one that could rewrite the history books. Linderman says scientists are starting tests on what look like evidence of lead smelting, a practice that until now was only seen in North America after the arrival of the French 1,000 years after the Hopewell tradition. So this is really fascinating that they had lead smelting. Well, I had the opportunity to go to the Indiana State Museum where Charlie Lacer actually had given all of these artifacts to the Indiana State Museum there in Indianapolis. And we went in and talked to the curator there. As we were talking and so forth, I had with me a friend of mine who is a metallurgist. I didn't know this at the time, but he was actually a metallurgist from General Motors. And so when she found out that he was this metallurgist, she said, so how would you be able to know if something that you find that was lead was smelted lead or if it was natural lead? And he said, well, that would be easy. We could do this test or this test or this test. But he said, but the easiest way to know did you find any slag associated with that? And she kind of was tapping her face like this, and she said, well, okay, come over here. She came over, opened up some drawers, and Wayne, the drawers were filled with samples of slag from all the slag piles that they had all over there on the Man Hopewell site. And the bottom line, that the lead was in fact smelted lead, and they were smelting lead there on the Man Hopewell site. So this is another indication of what kind of things are going on there. Also, I just want to point out, though, that the artifact that Wayne has in his possession that came from Bill Connor is actually, if you take a look, we're hoping that you might have this one as well. This is the Exploring the Book of Mormon in America's Heartland. This is the book that I did some years ago here. But on page, if you have this, I'm just going to kind of hold this up here. But on page 152 and 153, right here, it shows there's a picture here of Bill Connor. Let's see if we can get that there. There's Bill Connor, and you can see the artifact there that he had is on this page right here. I'm pointing basically to it right there. That's the artifact that Wayne has in his possession now. Now, he found other rocks that have high temperature glazing on them, which is what you can see there on the right side. This is even a better picture here of that right here where my fingers are right there. That's the artifact that Wayne is talking about here. And Wayne gave me a kind permission to add that to this book. But here's also copper smelting brick from a copper smelting furnace. They had copper smelting. Wayne, how much copper smelting was done in Central America that you're aware of?
They didn't have any swords. There's no swords south of the Rio Grande.
Any swords down in Central America, or smelting, or evidence for them actually smelting copper or iron or steel or
No, not till after about 700 AD. Way late.
Now, a couple of other things I just want to point out here in this book. This is, by the way, this book has become, thanks to so many of you who have been so supportive over the years, this book is the #1 best-selling book in the church on the subject of the evidences of the Book of Mormon. So this actually shows some of the different copper artifacts and knives and animals that are represented in copper. That they had the bears and vultures and deer and goats, for example. These are some knives. This is a copper scroll. This is showing some of the different metals, gold and copper and silver. Basically, the main metals that are mentioned over and over again in the Book of Mormon are all here, right here in the heartland of America. But this has been a major sore spot for people who believe the Book of Mormon to be an actual history of real people and places and events, because in Central America, they weren't doing anything with metals until long after the Book of Mormon timeframes, about 800 or 900 AD, as Wayne was saying. But this was happening back in the land of Nephi area, which was about 500 to about 200 BC. So this is way before. And these things that we're showing you here, these all date into the Book of Mormon timeframes. These were done by the Hopewell mound building people. So here we have even breastplates, and here they talk about here in Alma chapter 31, which we're not quite there yet in our Come Follow Me, but it says, "Behold, O my God, their costly apparel, and their ringlets and their bracelets and their ornaments of gold, all the precious things which they are ornamented with. So we have ringlets and bracelets these are from archaeological finds. Ornaments of gold. This is from the Peabody Museum at Harvard University that came out of a Hopewell mound and an official archaeological dig. We have breastplates made out of copper, just like it's described in the Book of Mormon here. And then finally, here's some more. These are breastplates that are found in different museums. Basically, all over back east, there's breastplates. And how many head plates and breastplates would you say you've seen over your course of your study of the Book of Mormon here, Wayne, in the heartland of America?
I've probably seen over 100 of each, over 100, maybe 2. There's a lot of them around. The best ones are in Chicago, Illinois, and they only show a couple out on display, but they've got a whole bunch in the back room.
Yeah, most of the time museums don't have enough room to show very many of these things, so they don't really show a lot. And then that gets us to basically page 289 in the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon here. If you want to turn there for just a second, I want to point out a couple of things, 289 and 290 here. These are actual artifacts that have been discovered. This is from Alma chapter 43, verse 19, which says, Moroni had prepared his people with breastplates and with arm shields, yea, and also shields to defend their heads, which they also called head plates. These are from different museums. The upper left one that you can see there is a copper plate from the Hopewell culture. This is from Sipe Mound in Ross County, Ohio. And this one is on display right now at the Ohio History Connection in Columbus, Ohio. And then the one next to it is actually at Hopewell Culture National Historical Park in Chillicothe, Ohio. And that's another breastplate there. You can see from older books back before the days of color photography in books. There are several other things there that they have skulls there that have head plates on them that were found in archaeological digs. In fact, there's another, there's one that they even call it a head plate there, and this is also at the Ohio History Connection in Columbus, Ohio. But they have numerous head plates and breastplates and so forth, exactly as described in the Book of Mormon. On page 290, Wayne, would you want to tell us a little bit more about this arm shield?
Well, I want to add something first on the breastplates.
Yes, yeah, please.
Okay, can you pick this up? This book here is Dr. Case. What's that? Dr. Case and Christopher Carr. And the interesting thing on here, when they talk about breastplates, they're digging in Mound 25 at the North Fork Works. Now, all of Hopewell will use the dig at Mound 25 and everything else at the North Fork to become the model, become the guide for all Hopewell finds from this time forward, okay? This is going to set the precedent. It's like a template. Anything that matches what they find now is going to be Hopewell culture. And in Mound 25, I got that. You're not going to be able to see the photo here. I'm just going to show it. This is on page, page 6. This is on page 6 of this book. These guys are digging here, and it says right here, they find 69 copper and iron axes, and they also find 92 copper and iron breastplates. Now, here's the kick. I've been to almost every Hopewell museum from Kansas to New York. You will never see an iron axe or an iron breastplate or an iron head plate in the Ohio museum listings. They're all tucked away in the basement. Now, this guy in this book, the Scioto Hopewell, Case and Carr are hollering foul to all their peers. They're saying, hey guys, we have too much information that's buried in our basements and in our museums. It's got to come out. These guys are heroes. in this book. They're heroes. And they're working hard to show that Hopewell had a whole lot more going on than we give them credit for.
Why do you think there's such a bias against the Hopewell having highly advanced metallurgy skills?
Well, you see, the more sophisticated these ancient people, because they first of all, everybody's an Indian, okay? Everybody's Indian. Indians can't do anything. But if we show that there's a sophisticated society, a civilization in North America, then that becomes a problem for the whole manifest destinies thing that Steve Smoot covers so well. That's a big fear. So you got to dumb down the Indians so we don't have any entanglements with the Eastern Hemisphere. No entanglements. Nada. Nothing. And the only way they can do that is to keep the Indians barbarians or not even citizens of this country.
Yeah, they have to try to downplay how amazingly advanced these civilizations were, and they don't want to accept that fact, because if they did accept that fact, then they'd also have to accept the fact that Joseph Smith had it right, that the Book of Mormon actually has it correct, that they actually did in fact have these metals, and they did actually do smelting, they did actually have gold and copper and silver and iron and steel, and everything that we are talking about here in the Book of Mormon has been found archaeologically. But unfortunately, none of that has been found in Central America. It's completely devoid of any evidence to support the claims of the Book of Mormon down there. So Wayne, tell us a little bit more about this arm shield.
Well, all I could tell you is that Danny Lawson did a lot of metal detecting in and around Nauvoo, and he found this in a creek just outside of Nauvoo. It's on the edge of the city limits. And now, I got to tell you, it really does look like an arm shield. Again, of course, you can see it's in rough shape. It's been in the water and the mud and the dirt for centuries. But when you look at it and you see the photograph with the arm on the thing, I mean, it really looks legitimate.
I think that's Danny's arm, actually, that is sitting on the arm and so forth. And then just above that are two similar kinds of arm shields that are from Okmulgee Mounds Museum in Macon, Georgia. So you can actually see that they are very similar to each other as far as their overall shape and size and even the thickness of the metals there. Down below that is an arm band or an arm shield. This one, this other arm shield would be one that would be down closer to the wrist. But the one that we have down below that is actually one that would be up here, basically on the bicep area. And it has a beautifully engraved turtle on it. It was found in the construction of a road in Ohio there, and basically it was actually Dr. Lou Erickson now is the owner of that, and he kindly let us have permission to use the photos. But it's copper.
Rod?
It's finely made. Just absolutely fantastic of this a tortoise, and it's a American tortoise, so it's a tortoise that is well known from the area around the Ohio area. Right. So clearly, yes.
I want to cover Mound 25 a little bit more. Okay, the man that they found in Mound 25 was a 7-foot guy. Also, they will tell you he had copper armor on his breast. He had copper armor on his arms, and he had copper armor on his legs. None of that has ever been seen, but I'm quite sure it's in the Chicago Field Museum if someone could find a way to get access to see it. Now, in Oklahoma, at the Spiro Mound, they also dug up a man there out of the Central Mound, and he also was covered in copper armor.
Yes.
The problem with that was it was done during the Depression, and the men doing the work hauled off most of the artifacts and sold them for their metal value to feed their families. And that's the sad part. We've lost so much good stuff in this country.
Yeah,
it's just sad.
It really is sad. My goodness. Well, a lot of people have talked about this. In order to have a civilization that needs to have armor, you have to have really a lot of people. You have to have a large civilization, so you have specialization of labor, people learning how to actually make steel. You have to have people taking care of their other needs like food and water and clothing and so forth. So you have to have a specialization of labor to make that happen. One of the things I wanted to point out here as we go back to Alma here for a second. This is on page 260 in the Annotated Book of Mormon. And this is from Alma chapter 28, verse 11. So this is in part of our lesson material here. And it says in Alma 28:11, let me go ahead and read actually verse 10 first. It says, and from the first year to the 15th has brought to pass the destruction of many thousand lives. Yea, it has brought to pass an awful scene of bloodshed. And the bodies of many thousands are laid low in the earth, while the bodies of many thousands are moldering in heaps upon the face of the earth. Moldering in heaps upon the face of the earth. There were many thousands that they talked about here. Heaps of earth. Sounds like a mound to me. What do you think, Wayne?
Yeah, I saw my first one as a Boy Scout. I was in probably 6th or 7th grade. We were on the Chippewa River, which flows into the Mississippi. We had to wade across to get to an island, and it was only waist deep, but we carried all our stuff over. And that evening, we had our campfire, and there was a huge hill in the middle of this island. And I say huge. It was only about maybe 10 feet high, but it was probably about 20, 30 feet across, okay? And the water is coming from the north. On the north end of the mound was pretty well straight from getting hit by floodwaters every time the spring would hit that mound and hit it pretty hard and erode it. And then on the south side, you could see it tapered off. It was nicely shaped and round. And so that evening, our scoutmaster, I'll never forget this, he walked all of us over there to the side that was eroded from the spring waters every year over the millennia. He shows us this thing, and he points out little specks sticking out of the mound. And he said, what do you guys think these little specks are? Well, we're all looking. And, of course, a couple guys started to grab one and pull a couple out, and, oh, my gosh, here's a whole bone comes out. It's a bone. Well, what are these? This is a bunch of deer. No. He said, these are people. This is a battle mound. This thing here was huge. They had a fight here, and these are all the dead guys. That's the first time I saw a battle mound in person. And I tell you, I never forget it. I never forget it.
Ever heard that story from you before, Wayne? That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. New stuff.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
On that page 260 in the Book of Mormon annotated edition here, it talks about the bodies of many thousands are moldering in heaps upon the face of the earth. How many mounds are there? Now, this is a question that so many people have asked. And originally there was a Cyrus Thomas map, which is actually what you can see here. The Cyrus Thomas map was back in the 1894. And in the Cyrus Thomas map, it shows somewhere around about 100,000 or so mound sites. But I wanted to make people available that there's newer information than stuff from back in 1894. And this book right here, this is called the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Native American Indian Mounds and Earthworks. This is by Gregory Little. And in this book, on page 3 of this book, and this is what we have quoted here in the Annotated Book of Mormon. I just wanted to show you the actual book here so you can see it. It's showing right here. It's showing the Cyrus Thomas map right there. And then on the next page over, this is... on the next page back, I should say, on page 3, this is what it actually reads. So this is on page 3 of this book, and this is what it says. It says, quote, the most common question that is asked about mounds is how many exist. In the 1800s, the Smithsonian sponsored many expeditions to identify mound sites across America. A map shown below was produced by Cyrus Thomas in 1894 in a Bureau of Ethnology book. They found approximately 100,000 mound sites, many with complexes containing 2 to 100 mounds. So if you have 100,000 mound sites, and many of them have between 2 and 100 mounds, that puts us at 200,000 to maybe even 1 million mounds. The figure of 100,000 mounds once existing, based on the Cyrus Thomas map revealing 100,000 sites, is often cited by others. But that estimate is far, far too low. After visiting several thousand mounds and reviewing the literature, I am fairly certain that over 1 million mounds once existed, and that perhaps 100,000 still exist. So, Wayne, how many mounds would you think that you have maybe seen over your course of study in the Book of Mormon here and your archaeological magazine, which, by the way, in case you didn't catch that before, it's Ancient American Magazine. I want you to tell us a little bit about Ancient American Magazine as well. But how many mounds do you think you've personally seen? Have you got any kind of an idea, estimate?
You know, I really don't, Rod, but I got to say, it's just many. I mean, hundreds. The best thing is all the sites that I've been able to walk. Going from Kansas all the way to New York and Wisconsin to Kentucky, I mean, I really feel I've walked where the Nephites have walked. And I've seen stuff that, man, I wish I could take everybody to see all the stuff that I've seen. A lot of it's on private property, and I can't take 50 people in a bus on that. I can only take a handful. Private landowners get a little funny sometimes. They show up with too many people. It's just one of those things. But there is so much stuff out there to explore. And again, showing Little's book was good. People can pick up his book and they can kind of take their own little ride one state at a time and go find a lot of these sites. They are findable. You can find them. So
tell us a little bit, how did you start Ancient American Magazine? And how long have you been doing that? Do you have a couple of things you want to tell us about the magazine? Well,
I'm in my 28th year of publishing the magazine. So all I can say is if I die tomorrow, I feel good about what I'm leaving behind in libraries and universities and private hands and collections. Hopefully, the history of this country has been saved a little bit, even though a lot of it, we can't get past the doors of the universities. At least it's saved in paper form, so somebody else can come behind me and go after it if they choose to do so, because there's a lot more to tell. I've only scratched the surface. It's nice because people call me all the time with new things that they've found, and I'm just tickled pink. And I tell everybody, this is what I see, or if it's something the way I think it is, show me something better, and I'm ready to change. So I show what I show, I speak what I speak, and that's the way it is. However, if you got something better, man, show me, and I'll add it to what I have or change. I'm not stuck in a paradigm, I mean, where I am is where I am, but if you got something better and it can stick on a piece, because there's people out there reading all these old books just like I have, and you find little treasures all the time when you read those books. And I started Ancient American for one reason. I ran around and I found out there at the time when I was younger, when I was younger, there were 7 what I call archaeology groups in North America that I belonged to either in person or by mail. And I realized that each one of these groups was a pocket of anywhere from 50 to 200 people. But their stories, their findings, all of their research was staying very focused within that group. Nobody was seeing what these guys were discussing in their lectures. And I got the idea, well, my goodness, let's just give a national forum with a magazine, and these people can supply articles to Ancient American, and we can publish them out and start educating America. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
In North America, this is what Ancient American's all about.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, let's get that back. We're going to have to wrap up here pretty quickly here, but then a couple of things that we wanted to also pay attention to. If we go back to Alma chapter 24, it talked about the swords. We've talked about the swords, and we've just barely scratched the surface here, folks. We have not really there's so much more information that we are really just wanted to tell you about. But basically the sourcing, the ores, are the ores found? Is there evidence for the working of those ores? In other words, mining, we have that. Is there evidence for smelting and the refinement of those metals and those ores? And yes, we do have that. We have the actual artifacts themselves that have been found. So we have an overwhelming evidence to support the Book of Mormon claims. But I wanted to bring up one last thing here, which is actually a part of, again, this is verse 16. It says that we will hide away our swords, yea, even we will bury them deep in the earth. And then in verse 17, it says, and now it came to pass that when the king had made an end of these sayings, and all the people were assembled together, they took their swords and all the weapons which were used for the shedding of man's blood, and they did bury them up deep in the earth. And this they did, in it being in their view a testimony to God and also to men, that they never would use weapons again for the shedding of man's blood. And this they did, vouching and covenanting with God. This burying of their swords, is that something that Native Americans have as a tradition that may have stemmed back from the days of the Book of Mormon? Wayne, what can you tell us about that?
Well, if you can see this is called a wampum belt. This is for the 5 nations of the Iroquois today, and it represents each tribe. We're talking about the Onondaga, we're talking about the Oneida, Cayuga, the Mohawk, and the Seneca. At one time, all 5 of these groups, this wampum belt has 5 symbols on it, the 4 squares, and 1 is a tree. All these tribes did not get along with each other, Hiawatha and Daganawida, and they settled all their differences. And when they did that, they all agreed not to fight amongst themselves. And so they dug a hole in the earth. They buried all their weapons of war, and they planted a pine tree on top of the hole, and that became the tree of peace. When you go into the reservations today in New York, you will see this in great detail, beautifully painted and done. It's beautiful. And this is their story of the 5 nations of the Iroquois. And this wampum belt has been around for at least a couple hundred years. Yeah, there was a time when these 5 nations, these 5 tribes did not get along with each other. And the bloodshed was bad. It was really, really bad. Hiawatha, along with a special person, a sky person named Daganawida, they came in and they formed a peace treaty, and they satisfied everybody. This wampum belt was made to represent that with all 5 tribes. And what they did is they dug a hole, and they pledged not to fight amongst themselves, and they buried all their weapons of war in the earth. And to cover that pile of weapons, they planted a young pine tree that would someday grow and become and cover that hole. And that to them is the tree of peace. And they talk about that all the time. And when you visit their reservations, you will see this tree of peace with all the other tribes, beautifully painted and shown in all kinds of ways on their decorative walls and their items or plates, and even in their films to show you who they are as a tribe. They all talk about the tree of peace. It really is a big deal, and it's set deep in their old stories.
A few years ago, I had the privilege of actually going to the Seneca Nation and doing some presentations out there. One of the things that they pointed out to me is on their flag, they had a white pine tree in the center of their flag there, and then they had 2 tomahawks basically crossed over each other underneath that pine tree, and they said it was the symbol of their particular clan, basically, I think it was, and that was showing that they had buried their weapons of war underneath the tree of peace, just like you're talking about.
Now I want to show you how thin this is. Look how thin this is. How's that? Okay, this piece here, I've never had it tested. It's either been smelted. A lot of their artifacts, they melted the copper. because of the boiling point, and they smoothed them out and flat. But they did it both ways. And the only way you can tell is if you actually get it tested.
Wow, that is awesome. Well, Wayne, did you have anything else that you wanted to share with us?
Golly. Just thinking about the book itself. One of the things that did catch my attention just real quick, it's in chapter 24, and it's verse 29, 24 and 29. This is the fighting and talking about the Amalekites and the Amalekites. This really jumped out at me when I reread it. It's nice to see that because, first of all, the other groups are mixed. I mean, the Amalekites, I know they're mostly Nephites, but they're going to have some Lamanites. Chapter 24, verse 29, it says, "Now among those who joined the people of the Lord, there were none who were Amalekites or Amulites, or who were of the order of Nehor, but they were actual descendants of Laman and Lemuel." It tickled me to see that Laman and Lemuel groups are still separate and still exist, even as late as this 90 and 77. I just really like that. Other people on this continent. And I know that at some point, everybody's
pure descendant of Nephi. I can't remember if that was Mormon or Moroni that said that, but they somehow they knew, they had kept track of their ancestry to the point that they knew that they were a pure descendant of Nephi. So these people were clearly taking care of tracking their ancestry as well. Well, Wayne, I sure appreciate you taking the time with us, and sorry for all the technical difficulties, but the internet out there in Wisconsin is just not that speedy, apparently.
Well, now where I live,
out there in the bushes. But listen, Wayne, we want you to know how much we love and appreciate you, and keep up the great work that you're doing. I want to just take just a couple of minutes and share with those who are watching and those who are listening just a little bit of information about Wayne. These are his books here, basically. So I want to just point them out. This is This Land series. This is This Land, Zarahemla, and the Nephite Nation. Then book 2 is Only One Cumorah. Has amazing information about Only One Cumorah. Book 3 is This Land, They Came from the East. And again, these are just a wealth of information. These are primarily for people who are members of the church here, by the way. Volume 4 is This Land, America, 2000 BC to 500 AD. These are some of these are excerpts actually from Ancient American Magazine and other additional research that Wayne has done. And then the fifth in the series is called This Land, Willard's Cumorah Land. This is Willard Bean. He's talking about Willard Bean, who is the individual who was called on a mission for 3 years and ended up staying 25 years there in Palmyra area and helped the church actually to obtain the actual Hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon, and some of his observations. Wayne also has a series of DVDs that are just fantastic. We want to just share with a couple of those with you here. He has more than this, but these are some of the main ones. This is called Hebrewisms in North America, and you can kind of see that. This is talking about people who are Hebrews have certain cultural significant items that basically show that they are Hebrews, and this is showing some of those Hebrew cultural items. So this is called Searching for Mayan Ancestors. So Searching for Mayan Ancestors. Wayne, you want to just tell us just really quickly a little bit about Searching for Mayan Ancestors?
Well, that's a big surprise. People will find out that the Mayans are not Hebrews. They're Hindus. That's the big surprise.
All right, and then
I didn't make this up.
Yeah, it actually comes from the book called Hindu America, right?
Yes, by Shaman Lao. Shaman Lao.
Your other DVDs here. One of the first DVDs that I first saw here It's called Book of Mormon Archaeology in North America. This is Volume 1. He also has a Volume 2. But this has got some just fantastic information about the archaeology here in North America. Then he also has, this is an early one here. It was called The Mystic Symbol, Mark of the Michigan Mound Builders. And this one talks about Henriette Mertz and her discovery of this symbol that was on a lot of the artifacts that she was finding. A lot of farmers had artifacts with this symbol on it, and she figured out that the symbol was basically the symbol of the ancient Hopewell mound builder people, or specifically their god, and then what does that signify? Those that mark.
Yod, He, Va.
Yep. Read from right to left. What does that sound like to you, everybody? Sounds like Jehovah. And that's, in fact, Wayne, would you like to tell us just a second more about what that means?
Well, it's a name of God, but there's a fourth syllable, but they don't say it because they don't want to do that. It's blasphemous to say the full name of God without having a particular ceremony. So this is the name they can speak out loud. Yod, He, Va.
Amazing experiences he's had with some of the Ojibwe people up in the upper northeastern part of the United States when he was back at some archaeological conferences some years ago, and that's for a different time. But then we have also the Cumorah Land, The Last Stand, which is another of Wayne's DVDs here, talking about the Hill Cumorah, and that this is showing forth the evidences for that. You have Jaredites in North America. This is another great DVD that you can actually get your hands on. Wayne, you want to tell us just a little bit about Jaredites in North America?
Well, it's just that there's a lot of good information. I really thought it would be hard to put that together, but the more I dug, the more came out. And there's a lot of surprises there, which I'm not going to say, but you will be amazed when you see what's there, and it's all backed up scripturally.
All right, and then we have the last couple here that I brought with me is Hagoth, builder of ships, master seaman. Would you like to tell us just a little bit about that?
You'll find in there where Hagoth set sail, and I'm pretty convinced where he left from, and I'm not going to tell you that either. You got to find out for yourself. But it will also back up the DNA in North America in a big, big way.
All right, and then the last one that I brought with me was the migration history of the Lenape and into eastern North America, a parallel account to the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, this is by Frenchman Raphael Raffinesque. He got pals with the Delaware Indians, who are the descendants of the people of the Wallam Alum, or the Red Book, who are called the Lenape, and they talk about a war and actually conquering those who built the mounds and the forts on the rivers of the eastern half of North America.
All right, fantastic. Well, folks, we're just the last couple of quick things here. I'd like to go to just a couple additional of the slides that we have talking about that. I mentioned about the gold fields, the Appalachian gold fields. This is from the Mining and Metallurgy of Gold and Silver. This is clear back in 1897. And they're talking about the gold fields of the United States may be divided into two grand geographic sections, those of the Atlantic Slope, or the Appalachian gold fields, and those from California. The Appalachian gold fields may be considered to be included within the boundaries of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama, although other states have occasionally some also as well. This is actually from an open file report from USGS, U.S. Geological Survey. This is gold, silver, and copper production from significant deposits in the states of Tennessee, Michigan, Illinois, and Pennsylvania, all of which are the Hopewell main lands there. So this is in metric tons of how much gold, silver, and copper have been found in all of those different states. This is from Indiana Historical Society, talking about the occurrence of raw materials. Copper, silver, and iron are specifically mentioned as being in Hopewell mortuary sites within the 8 major regional traditions. This is an actual head plate from Ohio Historical Society. There's another drawing of a head plate that was done. This is an individual in an archaeological dig that was uncovered, and this is the skeleton, and on the top of his head you can see the copper head plate. This is from the Mound Builders by Henry Chitrone in 1936. This is another picture of a different burial there, and again had head plates on. This is a breastplate, another breastplate, and this breastplate is interesting because it has these little shells on it, little beads. Each one of those beads is drilled, and the interesting thing about those beads is they are actually pearls. They are actually freshwater cultured pearls. And the interesting thing about that is if you go to 4th Nephi chapter 1 verse 24, it says, "Now in this 205th year there began to be among them those who were lifted up in pride, such as the wearing of costly apparel and all manner of fine pearls and the fine things of the world." So there we have the evidence for not only breastplates but pearls on the breastplates. Also copper goat horns and other copper implements. These are actually images from the book that I was showing before, but you can see them now a little bit more clearly. So you have things like flocks and herds. There are potential goat or deer horns. Vultures are specifically mentioned in the Book of Mormon as well. There's either copper bear or a pig effigy. This is a piece of copper. There are copper ear spools and harpoons, obviously possibly for hunting fish or other kind of game. Other copper artifacts here. This is talking about the gold and the copper and the silver. These are actual artifacts that have been discovered in the Hopewell Mound Builder civilization and tradition, along with the Jerem 1:8 scripture. These pages are from the Exploring the Book of Mormon in America's Heartland. And then here again showing this, behold, the costly apparel and the precious things. There's a copper scroll. And then this is from the Pioneer History of Western New York, talking about several hundred pounds of axes that were found in Aurora. The author said that most of them were without any steel, but that the iron was of superior quality. So this is, again, these are all from these old books back in the 1800s when people were actually plowing these things up and finding them and then recording this information in their books. So again, this is Bill Connor. There's a picture with Bill Connor here, and Mallory and Connor in a iron furnace. This is a copper smelting furnace or an iron smelting furnace when he came out there. And these are glazed stones. Right here, you can see some of the glazing on these stones here. This is high temperature glazing that was caused by the smelting process, which again does not happen naturally in nature like this, especially all around an oven, which is all these have been discovered with that around there. So this is the iron axe head. This is a little better shot of that so you can see that more clearly. This is the iron axe head. Interestingly enough, it doesn't look like European axe heads. This actually looks like the stone axe heads that the Hopewell Mound Builders used. This is one of the other ways that we know that this is an actual Hopewell axe head. And this is a bar that had some inscription on it. This is an iron bar. And this is the book again called Iron Age America Before Columbus. And it talks about this in the picture book, which is what we call it there. So there's all about information talking about the furnaces here as well. So bottom line, oh, there we go. Wayne, tell us about that. Go, hold that up again.
Just a really nice axe head.
Yep.
It's there.
Yep, it's all there. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us again. And for more information on Wayne, we're going to have you back again a couple more times before the end of the year because there's got a lot of archaeological things that we want to share with our listeners. Will that be okay?
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast. Supplemental Study, click the like button and share it with your friends. Be sure to go to bookofmormonevidence.org, which is a hub with all the links that you would like to the podcasts, to upcoming events, the store, 200 plus answers about the Book of Mormon, as well as links to our streaming site, which now has over 100 new videos from our virtual expo. If you want to see the expo, go to comefollowme2020.org, and you can also see them on the streaming site, bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.